these words that are part of this daily word in unity.
Isn't it great?
Yeah, every single one's just in and of itself. You could just sit in the silence with the word. Yes.
And so many sentences there.
Yes. Yes. Kind of a little bit of a taste of the unfathomable reality that we're participating in. Yeah. So this word, secure in the love of the divine, I am comforted. And it had me, like I like to do, that's such an attraction for me, is it had me asking questions. Because I always find that when I ask a question, it opens me up to a deeper glimpse of reality. So rather than coming to something with an assumption, I come with a question. And there were two questions that were strongest for my personal reflection here. The first is, what are we talking about when we say love of the divine? And the second is, what does it mean to have security there? Many of these things, we have an implicit grasp of it because of our spiritual path. And there's really not a hard need to get into the deep inquiries. Other than that, when we inquire, we get to taste extra aspects and dimensions with our mind, with our heart opening up even more in the investigation itself. So what came up to me was a story from when I was in the monastery as an entry point to this. And it is a time I was in formation, so it's my first 4.5 years. And it was a time during Lent in the Christian tradition. That's the weeks leading up to the crucifixion of Jesus into the resurrection. Lent is a time spiritually of letting go and being divested of things that don't serve us and opening up to the new life of who and what we are. And we already spent long hours in meditation, but we spent even longer hours in meditation and prayer and silence. And one of these times I was there, this was during a bit of a period of illumination for me. What does that mean? That means that things lit up pretty quickly. Everything seemed to be a bit of a sacrament or a direct experience of the divine. And I was kneeling there, and I had one of my we had lots of markers because we had many, many books of chant. So you'd have lots of little pieces of paper that would mark your place depending on where we were in the year and what we were chanting. Some books had 2,000 pages, some had a few hundred pages, some were smaller, but it helped to have these. And these, we mainly used what we called holy cards, that were devotional cards, pictures of something that was inspiring, an inspirational quote, and in some way they connected the heart and soul to the divine. And this one picture I had was about the size of a postcard, and it was an angle of a statue that had been carved of Jesus on the cross. And I loved this postcard because it's this angle, and you only get it from above the belly button up through like maybe the shoulders and then the head. But you can see that, the arms are out and he's on a cross. And this statue, the angle of his head, his gaze, his eyes were closed because at that point they're showing him having died. But his head was laid like this, and the gaze on his face was so filled with love and compassion. And I loved having that out during Lent as a touchstone of this eternal love that is present no matter what is happening in our lives. And as I was there, mostly I had my eyes closed, but every once in a while I would open my eyes and I would look down. And then at one point when I looked down, the holy card itself became completely alive, and energetically, the holy card energetically, that was all that I was right there at that moment. I was right there at that time. So the statue itself was alive in my moment where I was in 1993. But then also I was alive in that time of the crucifixion. So everything was just lit up and it was just me and Jesus. And somehow I was there very close to what the bust or what that part of the body was. So I wasn't standing on the ground looking up at the cross. Somehow I was just energetically right there, just my face here and his face here. And without any words, his eyes opened and looked upon me with such like a lover's love. And there was this invitation to put my lips up to the gash he had in his side, because in the historical accounts, they say that one of the soldiers pierced the side to make sure he was dead. And when blood and water came out, then they made the determination he was dead and could be taken down. So in this, he had the gash on the side. So what I did is I received the call, again, wordlessly, and I, however you want to imagine it, put my lips right up to that wound. And right as my lips, because the wound was about the size of my lips, right as my lips reached that wound, I went into a very deep state of ecstasy and lost cognizance of anything around me and was just in this experience of the love of the divine without action steps or purpose or messages. It was all consuming. And in that, there was, you could say there were many things that happened, but one of them was absolute security. I wasn't trying to be secure, but there was the knowing of who and what I was and who and what this moment was without any words. And so when you hear a story like that, and even on my reflection of it, you have to wonder, well, what's actually happening? What are the nuggets? What are the essence of that is happening? And I would say this, it was an experience of what seems to be a universal truth. And that is this, that when reality matches love, when reality matches pure awareness, when reality matches unity, there can only be security because it is truth. Now you get different, I'm going to bring in 3 different traditions to look at this and then have another story to make it practical. So you could look at that and say, okay, well then, how does that play out? Okay, so when I am in the truth that reality is love and I'm experiencing it, body, mind, heart, and soul, how then can I understand it? Well, I looked at 3 traditions. I looked at Advaita Vedanta in Hindu philosophy, and you have the phrase Tat Tvam Asi, and in the translation it is, you are that. The understanding in that school of tradition philosophically is that the innermost self is shared by all things. So this love of the divine is the innermost self that is shared by all things. It points to a belief and a deduction, I guess, that pure consciousness is the underlying reality of all existence. So then you could say then that the security in the love of the divine is as much as we awaken to that essential nature of all things. And then I looked at the Quran. So there in the Muslim tradition, you have a set of prophecies that are directed to understanding our relationship with Allah, or what Allah, and in our terms, that would be a God source, wants with us. Not wants us to do, but wants with us covenantally. And you have a slightly different perspective there. Allah is not seen to be the fiber of creation. It is not seen to be the innermost self that is shared intimately by all things. That tradition would, as far as I can see, except for the mystical part, the Sufism probably would give a different light on that. But that tradition in its traditional sense would not say you are God so readily, but rather you are, when you are pure of heart, the reflection of the divine light, the mirror of the divine light. But it is held that Allah is so intimate with us that it is, and in chapter 50, verse, I think 16, that Allah is closer to us than Allah is to his or her own jugular vein. It says that in chapter 50. So that's pretty intimate. But you get a slightly different. And here you've got this wonderful quote that I wrote down. Neither heaven nor earth can contain me, but my faithful servant is the one that can and does. My faithful servant is the locus of divine remembrance. Makes me just want to stop there. But I want to move into a third tradition, and this is the tradition of my youth. It is mystical Christianity. It was the tradition in which I did most of my growing. And the reason I'm leaning into this tradition today for this message is because the concept of divine love is nowhere else so explicitly, foundationally inherent in the experience of reality, of what it means to be alive, and of what it means to have a relationship with consciousness and ourselves. It's so there. You get in John chapter 3, verse 16, for God so loved the world. Here you've got this outpouring of love. And how is that love shown? That God reveals that God is in form. And in 1 John chapter 4, you have God is love. And then in the Acts of the Apostles, which is a reflection on the experience of Christ, you get in chapter 17, God is that in whom we live and move and have our being. So here you get that divine love is that in which we live and move and have our being, and that is God. That is why you have the mystics left and right saying that the soul is God. The soul center is God in Christianity at its heart. And there's so much to be unpacked there, because then it shines a direct light that all our security then is what? Within us, which we are continuing to learn, continuing to grasp, to wrestle with, to awaken into. And we have a council in 431 that I had the chance of revisiting called the Council of Ephesus. And did I share this? I haven't shared this. When I was in Ephesus, that I went to this,
I don't think so.
the city of Ephesus. So I went to this magnificent archaeological ruins in Ephesus, the city of Ephesus, that's set apart, gated, powerful experience of the civilizations that came before us. And on my way towards the exit with my colleague and friend, there was a path that led out, and there was a path that just kind of went off in the distance where you saw some ruins and a tiny little sign that said Church of Mary.
Really?
And I'm like, oh, I'm going to that church. Like, what is going on out there? And nobody was going there because it looks like nothing. And after you go through all this magnificent architecture and you're kind of done after 3 hours, you know, who wants to go out to a pile of rubble that's out way off to the left in a field? But we went, thank goodness we went. That was one of the highlights of that entire trip for me, because we get out there and we're standing there before this church that was built probably in around 300 AD, but the ruins were there, and we're reading the placard. That is where the Council of Ephesus took place in 431 AD. Now, that may not mean a lot to you if you're listening to this. It means a lot. It means a lot. There were 2 proclamations that came out of that council that are really forgotten in large part in the broad mainstream Christianity. The first was the proclamation that Mary is Theotokos. And what is meant by that, that Mary is the bearer of God, not just Jesus who is God, but mysteriously the bearer of the ineffable, of that cannot be created. That proclamation was made in all its mystery. That which cannot be created, she is the bearer of. So think about the implications as human beings of what that means for us and our capacity. And the second was the proclamation that Jesus was mysteriously, they couldn't explain it, true God and true man, that somehow the flesh was the ineffable, eternal God source, not just a messenger, not just a symbol, not just a derivation, but the fullness of it. And they left the rest in the mystery there, because there were lots of schools of thought wondering who's Jesus, who's Mary, and you had lots of ideas back then that coexisted. It would have been nice to me if they hadn't made it a dogma and allowed the contrary beliefs to coexist. But the church was getting broken apart and put in fractions, because some people believed that Jesus was only a man that bore God and was not God, or that Jesus was really a holographic experience that was God but was never really in physical form. So there are all these beliefs floating out there. The significance is powerful for us because it points to us as being God and as being God bearers, and that we're just discovering this. And to bring my message to a climax, because this is a very hearty theology I'm throwing at you today, I want to bring in a theologian that I love. It's Bernard Lonergan, a Canadian Jesuit. And he came through his method in theology to the concrete proclamation, and proclamation's hard, like the concrete theological premise that the human being at its very center, its deepest core, is desire, is a living desire, is the divine desiring. Now, we have struggled with desire ever since humans had records. Is desire holy? Is desire evil? Is desire to be suspicious? Should you just go full rein on whatever desire you've got? And understandably, because we're a mixed bag discovering what it means to be alive. But he came to the conclusion that at the very center core, that we are eros, that is a fire of desire to know. And that desire to know leads to the falling in love with love itself, with goodness, and with what he terms with God in the very center of our being. So oftentimes our security is shaken. Why? Because of our desires. We look for love in all the wrong places, and then we're insecure about what happens, or what we have to go through, or the trauma we need to heal, or the way we've separated from ourselves. But here we're invited to find that security by drawing close to our very desire itself. And that's very radical, very radical. He says so poignantly, I wrote down a few of the quotes, that this desire is pure and disinterested. That means, in complement to all the religious traditions and philosophy traditions and Buddhist at the front, that this desire, being disinterested, is not a grasping desire, is not aversion, is not resistance, is not dissipating our energy, but it is pure. Pure. Like the quietest, unsounded sound that longs to hear. And that it is a participate in the dynamic state of being, and that being is in love with God. He says that this center core of who and what we are is 4 pieces that are existing at all times. Questioning, we could say that that's a form of seeking or longing. Desire for truth, discerning value, and falling in love. And if you were to look deeply at dramatic experiences that you have had in healing, you will find that somehow those 4 pieces will be there. Maybe implicitly, maybe not, your mind didn't go through them logically like action steps, but they're contained therein. Therese of Lisieux, who I've quoted often, she said she was posed with a difficult question at a recreation time. And this is very funny because she lived in a time when the popular belief was you need to believe you're very unworthy. And she wasn't willing to believe that. And so there was a trick question that the leader in the community said to her, Therese, do you think you're humble? Now that's like a trick question, right? Because if you say, yes, I believe you're humble, she's going to say, well, that's pretty arrogant to say that you're humble. And if she says no, she might not be being honest with what she's truly experiencing. And she says so profoundly, she said, yes, I believe that I am humble because I have always been obedient to the truth as it arises from my heart. She always asked questions, and it led her to fall in love over and over again. Towards the end of her life, when she died when she was 24, she cried out in prayer one time, my love, your love has gone before me. It has carried me. I have longed for it. And now it is an abyss whose depths I cannot fathom. Love calls to love, and I can do nothing but throw myself into the abyss. Security comes by answering that call that arises in the form of question right within us. Isn't that interesting? The question and answer being right there within us. I want to leave you with a short story in my own life that played this out. So I was in high school, and at that point I was a senior in high school, and we were very involved in our church, very charismatic, a lot of healing gifts. I was going through a very dark period, but I was also having these very lit up moments. And my best friend at the moment was an atheist. And she was the most compassionate person to that point in my life that I had ever met. She loved everybody and loved plants especially, and loved animals, and was so gentle. And I thought, what is this? Here is somebody that doesn't believe in Jesus. I was very Catholic, and doesn't have a belief system, and doesn't even believe a God exists. So if I am getting all of my experience of love from this tradition I'm in, what is this that I'm experiencing? I was genuinely confused. And I went and I talked to a priest, and he was of no help. And so then I was praying at night in my room, and my room was it would be filled with blue light and white light. It was a very alive place for me. And as I'm laying there and I'm looking at my Bible, and I asked the question, what is this that I'm experiencing in this human being? And then what do I open up to? God is love. And those that abide in love abide in God, and God in them. And immediately I was comforted, just like our daily word today. because I was given this answer.
Yeah.
I could understand clearly how this beautiful woman, Kathy, my beautiful friend, was love. She was God's love. She didn't need to use the word God. If God is love, that's an equal sign. Is an equal sign. If you ever did math in school, you know is an equal sign. 2 plus 2 is 4. 2 plus 2 equals 4. So therefore, the language could just simply be love. Did not need to use the word God. My question led me to what? An experience of truth that led me to the discerning of value, Lonergan's method, that led me to falling even more deeply into this love affair. Why? Because I was in even deeper union with my reality. There was no conflict in my reality that had shown up as confusion earlier. Our security is right there. It's right within us. And it's ours to open up to the purest desire of our being, to harness ourselves, to bring ourselves into the alignment that we stay very, very, very close to that. I'm going to end with one quote. Someday, after mastering the winds, the waves, the tides, and gravity, we shall harness for God the energies of love. And for the second time in the history of the world, man and women will have discovered fire. We have not discovered that in its fullness yet, right? Fire's kind of mainstream now. I don't think anybody disputes the mechanisms of physical fire. So when humankind discovered fire, it became a reality in the consciousness of its existence. We are not in that mainstream 100% yet, but we are here. If you are here, you are one of the pioneers that's harnessing that energy of love. And I'll tie it up with a part of one of my poems. I wait, so often wait, to hear you, to have the blade of grass whisper in my ear, yes, you, to have the old leaves that gather at my door part to make me a path, yes, you. To have the crisp wind catch me unaware and tickle me. Yes, you. You are there. And I keep searching, beating up against my own walls of ignorance. I can't stop trying. For it is an acting upon the desire you have placed within me that will not stop or leave or cease. And the land is so silent these days. I have fallen silent, reduced. What am I to do? For there is only you.
Thank you. Oh, I have to bring it up a little bit.